Hello readers by eyes and by ears, this is Mari Chan and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we are continuing with the reading of Peerless Volume 2, also known as Wu Shuang by Meng Xi Shi, and we're starting at chapter 65 and we'll just see where we go. Hope you all enjoy. Chapter 65. Cui Buqiu was liked by many, but hated by more. Although the Zuoye Bureau wasn't widely known, they enjoyed Empress Dugu's full support and thus wielded great authority. Countless people had found themselves in his hands, and even more cursed him behind his back. He had a heart hard as steel. He never thought anything of it. Similarly, Feng Xiao's flattery stirred no pleasure in him. Deputy Chief Feng, whenever you praise me, a certain phrase comes to my mind. When it comes to the great men of this world, only Liu Bei and Cao Cao qualify? The weasel paying the chicken a New Year's visit. Feng Xiao chuckled. Then that makes me the weasel and you the chicken. Taoist Master Cui doesn't seem to me like a chicken awaiting the slaughter. You're more like a cunning fox seizing a win at any cost. Is that so? Said Cui Buqiu. For myself, I find Deputy Chief Feng quite like a weasel. And a very flamboyant weasel at that. Feng Xiao let such insinuations roll off his back. He'd never lost his temper in all their non-stop bickering. Instead, he tilted his handsome face toward Cui Buqiu and said, affectionate, "We joined forces in Liugong City to solve the case of the Khotanese envoy, and now we've dealt with Duan Qihu and Xing Mao. Perhaps we're not bosom companions who lay down our lives for each other, but we can still share weal and woe. Why do you insist on pushing me away? You really are from the Cui clan of Boiling, aren't you?" Cui Buqiu took out brush and paper and began to write. "Whether I am or not, what's it to you?" he asked without raising his head. "Judging from your reaction, even if you are, you must have fallen out with him. Otherwise, why would you say you have neither father nor mother, courtesy name nor title?" Cui Buqiu raised an eyebrow, his brush never stopping. "So while I was talking to Xiao Liu yesterday, you were lurking about eavesdropping," he said with the shadow of a smile. "Is Deputy Chief Feng not ashamed of his ungentlemanly behavior?" The corners of Feng Xiao's lips turned up. "Taoist Master Cui is always thinking how to screw me over. If I don't stay on my toes, I fear one day I'll be left without even a pair of pants to my name." He looked down at the paper Cui Buqiu had pushed over to him. Upon it were written the 4 lines of the letter they'd found on Duan Qihu. Feng Xiao nodded. "A perfect replica." "Where's the letter?" "I lost it." Cui Buqiu stared at him frostily. "Please, it was stained with blood from a mangled corpse. Even you must find that filthy." Feng Xiao said self-righteously. Cui Buqiu heaved a sigh. Working with Feng Xiao had its advantages. When two men of intelligence conversed, much could be said in a few words. Feng Xiao was also an incredible martial artist. Even the foremost expert of the Khaganate, Fo'ar, was helpless against him. But there were downsides as well. Feng Xiao wasn't Cui Buqiu's subordinate. Cui Buqiu couldn't order him around. The Zhejiang Bureau was equal in status to the Zuoye Bureau, though, given Feng Xiao's temperament, the power of the emperor himself might mean nothing to him, let alone his sister agency. He was erratic and restless, and Cui Buqiu never knew when he might be thrown to the wolves. While working with him, Cui Buqiu not only had to do his job, he had to match wits with Feng Xiao and remain constantly vigilant for tricks and traps. He was forced to split his focus. It was small wonder his old cough had resurfaced after a 2-year absence. Feng Xiao smiled. "Don't sigh like that. If Qiao Shan overhears, she'll think I'm pushing you around again. I've read the letter, and there's nothing mysterious about the paper itself. Anything useful is contained in those lines of poetry. Didn't you say you had some ideas? Let's hear them." "Surely someone as clever as Deputy Chief Feng can solve it himself." "All right. Let's write down all our guesses so far, and we'll trade notes, That's fair, isn't it?" "Very well." Each took a brush and paper and set to work. After a moment, they showed each other what they'd written. The first line was, "I climb Mount Yesher in the east to behold the boundless turquoise sea. I think it's referring to a place, said Feng Xiao. Mount Jieshi, where Cao Cao wrote this poem, is in Beiping Commandery. But if it were that simple, anyone could guess. When you take just the first and last characters, however, you get Donghai Commandery. Cui Buchu nodded. Considering how cryptic the contents are, they must contain information about the 13 floors of Yunhai. I've been thinking. The 13 floors of Yunhai are watertight in their dealings. They refuse to disclose their own identities even to each other. Although this makes it easier to keep secrets, over time, their members are more likely to turn on the organization. Look at Duan Qihu. If he'd known anyone besides Yu Heng and Feng Xiaolian, he might have taken the risk and fought for their sake. But he knew only two, one a monk and the other a woman. His doubts grew, and he balked at throwing in his lot with them. You're right, but the founder of the 13 floors must have considered this too. To put those like Duan Qihu at ease, what they needed was a chance for everyone to meet. Unfortunately, it appears Duan Qihu perished before he could attend. The third line is a poem by Xie Lingyun, said Cui Buchu. Before we could enjoy the wonders of spring, we glimpsed the approach of summer. The changing seasons weigh my chest with sighs. Hair hangs from my temples, streaked with white. He wrote this in Nanting after he was demoted and sent to Yongjia County. Feng Xiao quirked a brow. There's plenty to dig into here. Yongjia, Nanting, even Xie Lingyuan's ancestral home. Any of these could be our answer. Yet none of them are. The answer is summer. Why do you say so? Asked Feng Xiao. Cui Buchu smiled. Because of this next line. The river of stars runs clear and shallow. This is an ancient poem from the Han Dynasty, from the anthology of works Crown Prince Zhao Ming collected. Here, the poet paints the picture of the Milky Way to express their emotions. Distant lies the cow-herd star, luminous lies the weaver girl. She lifts her pale and slender hand, shuttle clacking as she weaves. Alas, her work is never done. Her tears pour down like rain. The river of stars runs clear and shallow. What distance lies between them? The width of just a single stream, yet their love will never reach. Cui Buchu continued, then looking at the previous line again. Before we could enjoy the wonders of spring, summer, Zhuming, has already arrived. Zhuming is another word for summer, just like Jinsu for autumn. When we combine the two, it points to the 7th day of the 7th month, the day of the cowherd and weaver girl's reunion. When Cui Buchu spoke to Feng Xiao, it was normally with a sneer or a smile that failed to reach his eyes. It was rare for him to reveal an easy smile devoid of mockery, as he did now. For a moment, his brow was smooth and his eyes content. Feng Xiao suddenly realized Cui Buchu wasn't bad-looking at all. Despite his sickly complexion, his eyes were clear and bright. When he looked at others, they shone. He was intimidating when his expression was frosty, but when he smiled, it was like a spring mountain, flowers and trees in radiant bloom. No wonder Bing Xian was drawn to him. Taoist Master Cui should really smile more, said Feng Xiao with a smile of his own. Who knows? Perhaps I'll waver and find myself growing soft toward you. You should continue being hard on me, Cui Buchu said. If there comes a day when Deputy Chief Feng is suddenly obedient, I'll suspect you're plotting something. Feng Xiao sighed. Why do I even try? Cui Buchu had no interest in bickering. Enough, he said impatiently. What do you think, Deputy Chief Feng? Look at him. His eyes might be alluring, but his temper's awful. He loses at the slightest thing. Small wonder his health never improves. With that attitude, anyone who falls for this invalid will find themselves chased off within 3 days. Throughout this silent criticism, his genial smile never wavered. Oh, I agree completely with your analysis. Cui Buchu frowned. Don't you have anything to add? We have the date, but the location requires more discussion. My guess is this second line. To your side I will return if safe. If dead, my love will never fade. Must relate to the location, and whether it's in Donghai Commandery. But I've got nothing at the moment. Suibichu lowered his head, brow creasing. With such a convoluted set of clues, even if Duan Hu thought for an age, he would never have come up with the answer. The 13 floors of Yuanhai must have a key for decryption. Unfortunately, this is the only letter we have. Otherwise, I could decrypt it by comparing them. Here, Feng Xiao and Cui Bichu differed. Cui Bichu was fond of puzzles, but Feng Xiao never deigned to do anything difficult. If he couldn't solve it in a moment, he'd set it aside and let it solve itself. It wasn't as if the 13 floors of Yuanhai could run away. Sooner or later, they'd slip up. Seeing Cui Bichu still immersed in thought, Feng Xiao murmured that he was going for a walk, then stood and left. Cui Bichu held his forehead in silence, ruminating. Feng Xiao met Jin Lian in the hall. Since they'd arrived in Qiemo, Apa Khagan's lesser Katuan had kept a low profile. She wasn't a patient person by nature, but she understood Feng Xiao and Cui Bichu had their own business to attend to and might not be able to protect her at all times. Wary of an ambush from Foar, she'd hardly stepped from her room the past 10 or 15 days, and only sent the maid they'd hired from Liugong City out to inquire about the news. Yet this had also given her an opportunity to watch from the sidelines and see what these two could achieve. She hadn't expected them to turn the city upside down with a flip of their palms, fomenting a crisis that saw one giant of Qiemo dead while unseating the other. Ultimately, Xing Mao was a smarter man than Duan Hu. As soon as he understood the hopelessness of the situation, he handed over his wealth in exchange for the lives of his family. The latest gossip reported that the Emperor of Sui, in a display of generosity, had already issued a decree appointing Xing Mao the Marquis of Shanshan and granting him a residence in the capital. He was permitted to travel to the capital to greet the emperor, then expected to settle down there with his family. Jin Lian was secretly glad she'd chosen to work with Feng Xiao and Cui Bichu. If these two could destabilize the entire city of Qiemo, surely they could convince Apa Khagan to side with the Sui dynasty. With this, she grew a little more confident. Good day to Feng Langjun. Xin Lian bowed to Feng Xiao. She was still disguised as a woman from the Central Plains. Though her accent was a little stiff, she learned most of the required etiquette. Feng Xiao found her clever. While the majority of her countrymen's only concern was their nomadic and marauding lifestyles, she'd set her sights on the far-off Central Plains. She chose to pursue an alliance with the powerful Sui dynasty rather than be annexed and ruled by Ishbara. Is there anything I can do for Jin Yangzi? Feng Xiao used the alias she'd assumed for their journey. How is Cui Xianshang? She asked. The 8 tribes will gather in Suyab very soon. I fear if we delay our departure even a few days, we may not make it in time. We could set out tomorrow. Wonderful, said Jin Lian happily. I left home so long ago. I can't wait to see the familiar grasslands. And when I return with the two of you, the Khagan will surely be pleased. After the incident with Duan Hu, Jin Lian's attitude toward them had undergone a shift. Where she'd once been distant and polite, she was now open and amiable. But Feng Xiao didn't mention it. He merely smiled. We still have a generous gift for the Khagan. Jin Yangzi will not walk away disappointed after this trip to Suyab. The statement seemed chock full of implication. Excusing herself to pack her bags, she bade farewell to Feng Xiao and went back to ponder his words. After a time, Feng Xiao returned to his own room. There was no doubt that Cui Bichu was brilliant. Feng Xiao wouldn't be surprised if he'd already unlocked all the mysteries within those poems. He'd thought to try a trick or two to drag some answers out of him, but when he pushed open the door, he was greeted by the sight of Cui Bichu with his head on the table, fast asleep. When Feng Xiao had used incense of helplessness on him, long before he knew Cui Bichu's identity, he'd checked this man's pulse. Cui Bichu suffered from a lack of both qi and blood. He'd likely been frail from birth, a condition worsened by the circumstances of his upbringing. Feng Xiao didn't have to be a renowned doctor to tell he was unlikely to live long. Cui had spent the past few days exhausting his brain with calculations, then dragged his body through that secret passage. He'd been at his limit for a while. Now he'd hardly woken up, and he was back to taxing his mind with poetry. Of course he passed out. The sunlight outside was just right. Warm spring rays spilled down over Cuibuchu's profile, limning it with a dazzling glow. Feng Xiao stared. He couldn't help reaching toward Cuibuchu's face. His slender fingers brushed over Cuibuchu's cheek, never pausing for a second. They landed right on his nose and pinched. Cuibuchu was sound asleep. Though he didn't wake, his discomfort was obvious. He frowned in his sleep, then opened his mouth to breathe. Heh! Feng Xiao smiled mischievously. With his other hand, he covered Cuibuchu's mouth. How will you breathe now, I wonder? What are you doing? Qiao Shan's angry shout came from the doorway. He'd been discovered so quickly. Feng Xiao clicked his tongue and regretfully let go. Cuibuchu had slept through all of Feng Xiao's mischief, but Qiao Shan's shout woke him. He rubbed his eyes and pushed himself up. One side of his face bore a red mark left by his arm where he'd slept on it. For a moment, he was completely absent the gravitas of the head of the Zuoye Bureau. He knew no martial arts whatsoever, but made up for it with decisive and deadly tactics. Together with his exquisite mind, he rarely found himself at a disadvantage. Both Qiao Shan and Feng Xiao were well aware of this. They'd never dare underestimate him. But when they saw his bewilderment on being freshly woken, their hearts softened just a bit. Feng Xiao glanced sideways at Cuibuchu, and Qiao Shan quickly stepped forward, standing between Feng Xiao and Cuibuchu like a mother hen protecting her chick, as if Feng Xiao was a man-eating cannibal. This Qiao woman really was an eyesore. Perhaps Feng Xiao should think of some way to mess with her too. Feng Xiao fluttered his fan, smiling at the thought. Chapter 66. The next morning, Feng Xiao and Cuibuchu set off from Qianmo to the Western Khaganate's capital in Suyab, where Apa Khagan awaited. Gao Yi had offered to personally see them off, but Cuibuchu declined. They were still a group of only 4, with a heavy responsibility. Making a spectacle of their departure was inadvisable. The upheaval in Qianmo had exposed their identities. They'd gained a new enemy in the 13 floors of Yuanhai, and the issue of Fo'er remained unresolved. Their journey through the mountains would be long and arduous, and escorting Jin Lian safely back to the Gukturk court, they expected, would be rife with challenges. Yet it wasn't so. They departed Qianmo and arrived in Kucha, where they rested a few days before continuing toward Suyab near Mount Sanmi. As they reached the foot of the mountains, they could see the Gukturk wolf riders galloping in the distance. These were the lands of the capital. The entire journey had been uneventful, devoid of any danger. Even Jinlian felt things were going rather too smoothly. She turned to Cuibuchu. Has Fo'er given up on killing me? Until we stand before Apa Khagan, it's too early to say. Tell me, what's Apa Khagan like? The Zuoye Bureau had its own information channels, but they couldn't compare to Jin Lian, who lived at Apa Khagan's side. Few in the world knew Apa better than she did. There was a long silence before Jin Lian answered. He's actually a bit of a buffoon. Cuibuchu raised a brow. Those in the Zuoye Bureau had heard much about Apa Khagan, mostly from people around him. The most common assessment was that Apa Khagan was mistrustful, calculating, and envious of others. Other testimony came from Han prisoners of war who had narrowly escaped the jaws of death and returned to the Central Plains. In their words, he was a bloodthirsty demon who loved only battle. Jin Lian had said nothing about Apa Khagan on their way here, but at Cuibuchu's prompting, she began to speak. There are many Gukturk tribes, so there are likewise many Khagans. Think of the spring and autumn or warring state periods of your Central Plains. The nations are scattered and independent, and skirmishes between tribes are common. The Khagan today might be replaced with a new one tomorrow, and no one will bat an eye. But with Ishbara's rise, he's demonstrated his intent to annex the surrounding tribes and unify the Gukturks. Apa Khagan, too, is aware of this. There are plenty of ways to kill without drawing a blade, and the people at Apa Khagan's side are constantly changing. Cui Buchu nodded. He'd heard this as well. Jin Lian sighed. The Khagan has a wild imagination. Before I left for the Central Plains, he asked me to train a group of female bodyguards for him. He said women are more loyal and reliable than men, so they could keep him safe in my absence. Feng Xiao gave her a strange look. Is your Khagan a lustful man? Everyone loves beauty, from kings to commoners. Why should the Khagan be an exception, she asked. Though Jin Lian Katuan retained her charm, her brow and eyes were marked with wind and frost. However greatly she was valued for her insight and assistance, she was ultimately still his concubine and worried his favor would fade along with her beauty. A good portion of this endeavor had likely been Jin Lian's idea in the first place. She'd taken the initiative to court the Sui dynasty on Apa Khagan's behalf at great risk to her own safety. Training those female guards might secure his affection, and they would also serve as her eyes and ears. With this, Cui Buchu had a rough picture. Apa Khagan was a man of middling talent with an appetite for beautiful women and deep suspicion toward others. Both the eastern and western Khaganates were home to many tribes, each occupying their own territories. When Ishbara had emerged as a dominant force, Apa Khagan had never considered how to overcome him. Instead, he'd waffled between Ishbara and the Sui dynasty. Even if he'd once harbored some small ambition, time had worn it away. Persuading a man like him to join the Sui dynasty shouldn't be difficult, provided he was too thoroughly cowed to consider betrayal. The meeting between the 8 tribes would convene in just a few days. Cui Buchu would see they made good use of it. He was still thinking when a group of the riders galloped over and intercepted them. The Gokturk soldier at their head seemed surprised to see Jin Lian. He quickly dismounted to pay his respects with a bow. Jin Lian nodded back. She sat high atop her horse, lofty and arrogant, devoid of the warmth she'd shown Cui Buchu and Feng Xiao on their journey. But after exchanging a few words with the patrol, Jin Lian frowned in anger. She raised her voice with questions, and the Gokturks saluted and apologized, yet still surrounded Cui Buchu and the rest, drawing their long sabers. It certainly didn't look like they had come to welcome distinguished guests. Cui Buchu translated for Feng Xiao and Qiao Xian. They're arresting us. Jin Lian said we're her honored guests from the Central Plains and asked them to report to the Khagan. They said the Khagan had issued an order. No Central Plainsmen may enter the encampment. Jin Lian's face was dark with fury. If the Sui envoys she toiled to bring all this way took offense at this treatment and became their enemies instead, not only would her long journey have been in vain, she'd have forfeited her honor and good word. Neither Cui Buchu nor Feng Xiao were easygoing men. If the Gokturks slighted them, they might wreak untold havoc. Duan Qihu's fate was fresh in Jin Lian's mind. She had no similar death wish. She turned to Cui Buchu and Feng Xiao. I apologize sincerely to both of you. I had no idea the Khagan would give such an order. Even on pain of death, I swear you'll suffer no humiliation. Please wait. I'll speak to the Khagan myself, then personally return to invite you in. Before the Khatun leaves, tell us, has the Khagan always treated Central Plainsmen with such wariness? Cui Buchu asked. Jin Lian shook her head. I traveled to the Central Plains with the Khagan's express approval. You saw the letter yourself. It was no forgery. In that case, something must have happened after you left to change the Khagan's mind. Khatun, your sincerity is plain to us all. We will wait for you here. Jin Lian had feared his censure. Now she breathed a sigh of relief. She quickly apologized once more and turned to scold the soldiers. To their evident displeasure, they eyed Cui Buchu and the others, then nodded reluctantly, apparently agreeing to leave them be. With Jin Lian riding snugly in their midst, they returned to the Khagan's court. An hour later, Cui Buchu, Feng Xiao, and Qiao Xian spied soldiers cantering toward them. Their faces were unfamiliar. This was a different group from before, and Jin Lian was not among them. Was there a mutiny? Feng Xiao mused. Do you think the old Khagan died and a new one took his place? So the alliance was voided and Jinlian lost her authority? The Zhejiang Bureau receives intelligence from every corner of the land. Does Deputy Chief Feng really need to ask me this question? Feng Xiao shrugged. Hundreds of documents fly back and forth in the Zhejiang Bureau every day. I'm not like Taoist Master Cui, who remembers anything he reads once. Things slip through the cracks. I had planned to return to the capital after dealing with the Khotanese envoy. How was I to know you'd abduct me instead? He deftly shifted the blame to Cui Buchu. Apa Khagan has 2 sons, said Cui Buchu. His eldest, Yixuan, was born to his first Katuan. As for his second, Ade, his mother is unknown. She was likely from a humble background and passed away long ago. The Gukturks value strength above all. It's not uncommon for sons to usurp their fathers or a young brother to dispose the elder. But Apa Khagan is a cautious man. As far as I know, neither sons hold much power. You see how he values Jinlian, though she's borne him no sons. I find that very telling. So neither of his sons pose a threat, said Feng Xiao. I wouldn't say that. They say Appa dotes on his younger son and scorns his eldest. He believes his eldest cowardly, lacking the wolf-like nature of the Gukturks. They fell silent as the Gukturk group reached them, splitting in 2 and encircling Cui Buchu's party. The leader barked out orders in Turkic, his expression ferocious. Cui Buchu remained cool and indifferent as he replied in kind. After the brief exchange, Feng Xiao heard Cui Buchu's rapid whisper. Defeat them but don't kill them. Grab the leader. We're charging straight into the capital. Just the 3 of us? Are we not sheep wandering into a den of wolves? With Deputy Chief Feng here, who else qualifies as a wolf? Cui Buchu hissed. Feng Xiao burst into laughter. Now that's what I like to hear. The last word was scarcely out of his mouth before he appeared in front of a Gukturk soldier. Startled, the soldier yanked back on the reins, his horse's hooves rearing to trample Feng Xiao to death. As if Feng Xiao would give him the chance. His figure flickered and the soldier screamed. In a blink, he tumbled from the saddle. Qiao Xian waited until she saw him move to follow suit. She was no less valiant than him, but she also had to protect Cui Buchu. These Gukturk soldiers might be strong enough to plunder ordinary folk of the Central Plains, but they were no match for Feng Xiao or Qiao Xian. Within minutes, the entire group was strewn across the ground, their leader dangling in Feng Xiao's grasp like a helpless chick. Now, let's go cause some mayhem. Deputy Chief Feng was bubbling over with excitement, as if a chaos-free world were his only fear. Things should go much more smoothly with a few hostages in hand, and it happened that the leader of this group was no common soldier, but a Yabgu, a position of similar status to a prime minister or general. Keeping a tight grip on their captive, the group proceeded toward the encampment to request a meeting with the Khagan. Those who met them were shocked and enraged, but there was nothing they could do but rush ahead and report. Not half an hour later, they stood within the royal yurt, facing the illustrious Apa Khagan. The Khagan was between 40 and 50 years old, his beard full and his black hair streaked with white. Perhaps it was due to age that he hunched in his seat and had a habit of squinting when he looked at people. Jinlian, who stood at his side, shone with 100-fold more vigor and spirit. If she'd become Khagan of the Western Khaganate instead, perhaps Cui Buchu's group wouldn't have encountered so many problems. But it was the way of the world that men came first. No matter how lofty Jinlian's aspirations, she could achieve them only through Appa. Central Plainsmen, why do you hold my minister hostage? Apa Khagan snarled, watching them through narrowed eyes. Gukturk princes and officials filled the Khagan's spacious yurt. Save for Jinlian, all glared balefully at the group in the center. Cui Buchu and Feng Xiao glimpsed an old acquaintance among them. Fo'ar sat right beneath Apa Khagan, eyeing them expressionlessly. A woman with Han features poured wine for the nobles in the yurt, her head and lashes lowered. She dared not risk a glance up. Ah! A sudden cry of pain cut the tense atmosphere. The Han slave had been kicked in the stomach and sent flying. She groaned on the ground, then struggled, trembling, to stand. terrified of provoking the nobleman who'd kicked her again. "Lowly bastard from the Central Plains! I'll crush you like ants!" growled the young Gokturk noble who'd kicked her. He glanced at Suibichu, his smile full of malice. Jin Lian hadn't been captured as they assumed. She'd changed into fresh robes, her dress stately and without flaw, but a hint of anxiety hovered in her eyes when she looked at them, as if she had much to say but couldn't speak. Perhaps this will be a bit more challenging than expected, Suibichu thought. Chapter 67. If we didn't take him hostage, would Apa Khagan be willing to see us? Suibichu asked. The Khagan sent Jinlian Kato into the Central Plains to treat with us. We've come in good faith as representatives of great sway, yet this is how the Khagan greets us. Truly, it chills the heart. Who sent Jinlian? Bellowed Apa Khagan. The whole thing was her idea. If not for these guests with me who've come from so far, I'd punished her severely today. His gaze seemed to drift toward Foar, who lowered his head and drank his tea. When Suibichu saw this, everything became clear. Something had happened before their arrival. Now they knew what. Foar had beat them here and bribed or intimidated Apa Khagan. The fearful Khagan had capitulated, not daring to offend the foremost Gokturk martial artist. On seeing Suibichu's company and their apparent lack of manpower, he'd compared the two parties and picked the more advantageous side. The Khagan fears offending Ishbara, said Suibichu coldly. Does he not fear offending the Sui dynasty? A mere 3 of you, another voice sneered. And you think you speak for the Sui dynasty? If the people of the Central Plains are all so weak and useless, we have nothing to be afraid of. The lesser Katuan has obviously been deceived by you. Perhaps you seduced her into agreeing to lead you here. The speaker was the young Gokturk nobleman who'd cursed them earlier. For him to be sitting in the Khagan's yurt at his young age, he had to be someone extraordinary, the son of Apa Khagan or a nephew. That he'd received no censure for kicking the female slave was a similar mark of his status. He'd clearly intended it as a threat. As the saying went, he'd made a show of killing the chicken to scare the monkey. Unfortunately, Suibichu was no monkey, and neither was Feng Xiao. Before the young man had finished speaking, Feng Xiao was already rushing toward him. Foar had been watching them carefully all this time. He didn't stand by. He dashed over to intercept Feng Xiao's attack. The two of them were soon engaged in an all-out brawl within the yurt. True tea surged and swelled, overturning cups and plates. The bystanders paled in fright and retreated to the sides of the yurt. Yet Apa Khagan gave no order to stop. It seemed he wished to see who was stronger before making his decision. Feng Xiao shook his sleeves, and a table beside him was flung into the air, spinning toward that outspoken Gokturk nobleman. In a panic, the young man trod on his own robe and stumbled to the floor. Foar neither blinked nor turned as he sent a burst of true tea from his palm. The table cracked in two, mid-air, saving the nobleman from grievous injury. Foar had failed to defeat Feng Xiao in Liugong City, but he was still a powerful martial artist. Even if he fell short of Feng Xiao's skill, they were well matched. Too many parties had been involved at the time, forcing Foar to split his focus. Now he brought his full strength to bear, and his profound internal energy and imperious style consumed Feng Xiao's total attention. The young man, seeing that he was no longer in danger from Feng Xiao, glanced toward Suibichu on the sidelines and sneered. He waved a hand for his men to seize both Suibichu and Qiao Xian. He'd obviously never been to the Central Plains and didn't know an unwritten rule of its martial circles. When it came to women who wandered in the Jianghu, the more beautiful they appeared, the less one should provoke them. I like that. The guards who had pounced toward Suibichu found themselves rolling on the floor, their reward for underestimating Qiao Xian. To subdue a mob, one must first capture its leader. She had learned this principle well from Suibichu and swept without hesitation toward the Gokturk noble. The noble saw a blur, but felt sharp pain in his arm as the world began to spin. The next thing he knew, his face was pressed to the ground. A slender foot, more delicate than that of the average Gokturk woman, crushed him to the floor. In other circumstances, the young man might have grabbed at and caressed such a foot, but he didn't dare entertain the thought now. This foot was terrifyingly strong. He couldn't break free no matter how he struggled. If anything, it pressed down harder, mashing his face into the rug. Agonizing tears swept into the carpet as he cursed her up and down, but it was all false bravado. In this position, he wasn't intimidating in the least. Xiao Xian didn't speak much Turkic, but she could hear the venom in his voice. She bent and yanked on his arms, making his face twist in pain as he pleaded with Apa Khagan for help. This man had belittled and mocked them, calling the Central Plainsmen lowly trash. Now he was howling on the ground, not unlike the female slave he had abused. "Stop!" Apa Khagan finally roared. Gokturk soldiers brandishing swords rushed into the royal yurt, but dared not approach. Feng Xiao and Fo'er were still fighting. "You claim to have come as guests," said Apa Khagan angrily. "Is this the behavior of guests?" "Aren't you, Gokturks, of the opinion that might makes right? We're simply following your example while in your lands," said Suibichu indifferently. "When you're ready to receive us, we can sit down for a proper discussion." In the center of the yurt, the two martial arts masters never paused. Other than Apa Khagan and Jin Lian, the Khagan some distance away and surrounded by guards, the Katuan still keeping her composure, the rest had either fled the royal yurt in fear or were cowering in a corner to avoid becoming a casualty themselves. Only Suibichu remained in place, proud and unbending. Despite his sickly complexion, he showed no hint of weakness, standing as straight and tall as a young pine within this den of wolves. Apa Khagan sputtered with fury and alarm, hesitating on whether to call for his guards to seize Suibichu. The man seemed to have glimpsed his thoughts, because he spoke first. "My companions will have their hands around your neck before they can take a step forward. What do you think? Are your people faster or mine? Would you like to make a bet? Your life against mine." Apa Khagan had no interest in gambling his precious life. Realizing he had no chance of victory, he shouted, "Stop! Both of you are my honored guests. Let there be no conflict between you. Tomorrow, we will have a contest at the 8 Tribes Conference. Our guests are welcome to decide the victor then." Feng Xiao and Fo'er sprang apart, landing on opposite sides as they stared at each other without expression. Despite Fo'er's outward composure, his blood was pumping, and it took him a moment to smooth his harried breath. One sleeve had been torn, leaving a shallow wound. Feng Xiao's sleeve had also lost a corner, but he remained calm and relaxed. Other than a few new wrinkles creasing his clothes, he looked no different than before. In this battle, it seemed Feng Xiao had come out on top. "The Khagan's son called us lowly bastards from the Central Plains. How did we return to being honored guests? I carry with me a document penned by the Emperor of Great Sway himself, and we arrived in the name of peace between our countries. If the Khagan allows his son to insult us without apology, he can't blame us for finding it unacceptable." Suibichu's manner was haughty. He refused to give Apa Khagan any out. Instead, he kept pushing, demanding an apology from the young man presently under Xiao Xian's boot. The moment he'd called for help, Suibichu had known he must be Apa Khagan's youngest son, Adu. Apa Khagan was furious, but he couldn't leave his son to be humiliated. This group possessed incredible martial arts. He couldn't afford to be ruthless. Even if he chose to fight, the Central Plainsmen would likely walk out unscathed. "Adu, apologize to our honored guests. You were first at fault." "I won't! Prince Adu's bluster was squashed as Xiao Xian ground his face into the rug. He was used to throwing his weight around. He threatened even Jin Lian like she was nothing. Though the Katuan had remained quiet throughout, she couldn't help the gleeful, "Serves you right," that came to mind. Prince Adu had no choice but to apologize, albeit indignantly. When Xiao Xian finally lifted her foot, several guards stepped forward to help him. Burning with shame, he sent a vicious glare toward Suibichu's group before storming out of the yurt. Apa Khagan forced a smile. "The Shula tribe declined to send a representative to the 8 Tribes Conference, but now we have honored guests from the Central Plains to fill their place. It will surely be a conference to remember. This place is no longer fit to sit in. Everyone, go, please, and rest. I will be honored to host you at our banquet later tonight." At that moment, a servant entered and stooped to whisper something into Apa Khagan's ear. The Khagan paled, then shot a glance at Foar. "These guests from the Central Plains arrived unexpectedly. It seems we're short on accommodations, so our guests must stay next to Foar Shensheng. Does Foar Shensheng have any objections?" "Since the Khagan made the arrangements," said Foar, "I naturally must accept." A short time later, they found themselves in a lavishly appointed yurt. It seemed Apa Khagan had no intention of slighting them. After such a shock, he was done stirring up trouble. Still, Qiao Shan worried that the Guk Turks would ambush them during the night. Their hosts had the greater numbers. Even if she went all out, she mightn't be able to guarantee Cui Bichu's safety. Feng Xiao, on the other hand, seemed entirely at ease. He merely asked Qiao Shan to inquire whether there really was nowhere else to stay in the royal capital but here, right next to Foar's lodgings. Qiao Shan returned with a plate of cut melon, supposedly a gift from the first prince. He'd also asked her to deliver a message. If the honored guests were uncomfortable where they were, he would be happy to host them. The wealth of the Guk Turks was modest compared to the aristocracy of the Central Plains, but it didn't stop their upper class from indulging themselves. Their group's yurt wasn't as expansive as the royal one, but it was still spacious. Thick wool rugs cushioned their feet, and beds had been placed along the sides. Colorful woolen tapestries hung on the walls, and the bronze tea service on the table was inlaid with gold and turquoise. It was clearly from the western regions, though whether it'd been purchased or stolen was impossible to tell. Feng Xiao took a seat and reclined against a pillow as he listened to Qiao Shan recite the first prince's message. "Then there's no need to worry." Seeing her look of puzzlement, he sighed at Cui Bichu. "You called Peijing just stupid, but yours aren't much brighter. Instead of putting your energy toward healing your injuries, Deputy Chief Feng insists on idle chatter," said Cui Bichu indifferently. "Do you believe yourself invincible?" "To think you pay such close attention to me," said Feng Xiao with a smile. "You noticed." Only then did Qiao Shan realize Feng Xiao was a little pale. Feng Xiao untied his sash, exposing his shoulder. It bore a dark red mark, obviously Foar's handiwork. Martial arts practitioners protected their bodies with true qi. Any injury that left a mark without an open wound came from internal damage. "Foar managed to hurt you?" Qiao Shan asked in surprise. She'd sensed Foar had grown a little stronger since their last encounter, but as she hadn't fought him personally, she couldn't be certain. If he'd injured Feng Xiao, it appeared her instincts were correct. Feng Xiao retained his blithe attitude. "I don't imagine he's much better off. He definitely had to swallow back some blood there. He's putting on a brave face, but he'll have aggravated his internal injury. I'm glad he's also busy recuperating." After saying his piece, he finally closed his eyes and tended to his injuries. "So there are other suitable accommodations. Yet Apa Khagan placed us next to Foar," said Cui Bichu. "He wishes to sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight before deciding whom to ally with." "The man's a scoundrel," Qiao Shan fumed. "Before, Jinlian... Actually, even though we were in a bind, Jinlian never spoke up for us. None of these Gok Turks are trustworthy at all." "We still have opportunities," said Cui Bichu. "Tomorrow is the start of the 8 Tribes Conference. We must make an impressive showing. Not only to defeat Foar, every tribe must know the people of the Central Plains are not to be trifled with. The stronger we appear, the more respect we'll command." Minutes later, Jinlian Katuan, that untrustworthy Guk Turk, came knocking. Before they could say a word of greeting, she blurted, "You're really in trouble now." Chapter 68. Qiao Shan's face darkened. "Why does the Katuan say so?" Jinlian realized she'd misspoken. She rescued her calm and inclined her head in apology. "My agitation got the better of me. Please forgive me." She even bowed like a woman from the Central Plains. Cui Bichu waved an airy hand. "We're all in the same boat. Anything that harms us harms you, so you needn't be so polite, Katuan. First, Tell us why the change in your Khagan's attitude. Does Foar terrify him that much? It's a long story, said Jinlian. I told you the Khagan asked me to train a group of women to serve as his guards. Those women weren't particularly strong, but they were more cautious than any man. And after they managed to help the Khagan through a certain crisis, he trusted them deeply. But while I was in the Central Plains, one of the women tried to assassinate the Khagan and almost succeeded. I'm told the assassin confessed that her father was a Han, while her mother was a Gukturk. Her father was killed by the Khagan's men, so she loathed the Gukturks. She purposely infiltrated the guards and waited for an opportunity to kill him. Jinlian paused, smiling bitterly. The Khagan killed the rest of the guards I trained in a fit of rage, and blame for the incident fell on me. Upon my return, I found myself detained. The Greater Khagan pleaded my case to stop the Khagan from punishing me. This was why I was unable to return for you earlier. What does that have to do with us? Asked Xiao Shan coldly. Though they numbered only 3, they were representatives of the Sui dynasty. As long as Apa Khagan was still of sound mind, he would never offend an envoy of Sui simply out of anger with Jinlian over the matter of some guards. Jinlian sighed. You've seen the Khagan has 2 sons. Neither of them are mine. The eldest was born to the Greater Khatun. I have a good relationship with her and her son, but the Khagan prefers his youngest, Ade, the one who insulted you earlier. I wish to cooperate with the Sui dynasty, but Ade believes the Hans cannot be trusted. He shows me little respect. He's much closer to the conservative nobles of our tribe. I'm sure he took advantage of my absence to pour poison in the Khagan's ear. As you Hans say, words can twist even metal. Perhaps the Khagan brushed him off at first, but as time passed without me here, the Khagan started to believe him. I could tell the Khagan was more distant on my return. Cui Bichu frowned. Khatun, don't tell me you've been fighting alone all this time, without even an ally or subordinate willing to speak up for you to the Khagan? I share a friendship with the Greater Khatun and her son. As I said, I have her to thank for the Khagan's temporary pardon. As for my subordinates, I had several who worked in and around the Khagan's yurt or by his side, but when I returned, I found all of them had been removed for various offenses. There isn't a single one left. Jinlian's mouth was set in a grim line. She was reluctant to reveal her vulnerabilities, but she understood that if she didn't speak now, Cui Bichu's company would distrust her, and she'd lose any chance to redeem herself. Before I left, though the Khagan favored Prince Ade, he listened to what I had to say. I never imagined Ade would gain so much ground so quickly. Now the Khagan listens to all his counsel. On top of that, Foar beat us here. He must have offered Appa something tempting for him to lean toward Ishbara. Cui Bichu pondered this. But earlier, Feng Xiao came out the victor in his scuffle with Foar, and Xiao Shan taught Ade a lesson on her own. If Apa Khagan is thinking clearly, he must know he needs to reweigh the pros and cons. The Khagan believes the first prince and I are on his side. If I speak for you, it'll only serve to anger him further, but my subordinates will do all they can to provide you with assistance. Can you put us in contact with the Greater Khatun and her son? Asked Cui Bichu. Jinlian understood at once. Cui Xianxiang wishes to form an alliance with him? It won't work. Why not? I've tried. Though the Greater Khatun spoke for me this time, she ignores external affairs and spends her days weaving her woolen rugs. Prince Yishun is timid, much like his mother. They don't act like Gukturks at all. They're more like Southerners from the Central Plains. She paused, realizing she'd put her foot in her mouth. Though the North and South stood divided, such derogatory words were obviously not fit for the ears of anyone from the Central Plains. Perhaps that wasn't the best comparison, she added quickly. None of the 3 minded. Jinlian was normally a calm and rational person. To vent like this, blurting things that wouldn't help resolve their problems, she must have been truly desperate. Then are you saying there's no chance to turn things around? Asked Cui Bichu. Not necessarily. You said it yourself. You caused a scene just now and enraged the Khagan. But he also witnessed your strength and doesn't dare decide rashly. I heard that after you left, Foar tried to see him and was turned away at the door. Tomorrow, we're meeting with the nations and tribes who are our allies among the Western Gukturks, but there will be contests of horsemanship and archery. The countries of the Western regions love sport, not literature. If Feng Langjun prevails in the competition, I will try persuading the Khagan again. He may change his mind. Don't you find it suspicious that one of your trained guards tried to assassinate the Khagan? Asked Suebichu. This incident happened just after you left the Khaganate, and when you returned, your people were dead. You've lost the eyes and ears you had around the Khagan, along with his trust. I agree, said Jinlian, and I suspect Adil is responsible, but there's no evidence, and the dead can't speak. I have no way to investigate. Apart from the greater Khatun and her son, are there no other nobles who hold a high position yet are unwilling to participate in the conflict between you two? Any who would speak up before the Khagan? The Khagan's mother, perhaps, or any other elders? Yes, said Jinlian. Though it's not a family member, it's the Black Moon Shaman. The Gukturks, of course, had their own gods. However backward or primitive their religious practices appeared to those from the Central Plains, the Gukturks themselves were pious, and their tribes had great shamans capable of communicating with the gods. The Khagan would never share his authority, so these shamans took no part in decision-making unless the Khagan specifically sought their opinion. Still, every Gukturk tribe, from large to small, had a shaman of this kind. The Black Moon Shaman was aged and spent most of his time in seclusion. An audience with him was no easy feat, but Suebichu suggested Jinlian pay him a visit. Even if they were unable to win him over, they might still ask him to put in a few good words with the Khagan. As for gifts, Jinlian had brought several treasures back from the Central Plains, all purchased from Lin Long Pavilion. Though they were few, they were valuable, surely capable of swaying the Black Moon Shaman. Time was short if they wanted to see him today. It'd soon be dark. Jinlian stood and bade them farewell, then left to seek the shaman. The door had hardly swung shut behind her when someone arrived claiming to be the first prince's attendant, sent to ask how the honored guests were adjusting to their lodgings. Suebichu called to the attendant to wait outside, then turned to Feng Xiao. Quick, tear open my clothes, climb on top of me, and molest me. What? Feng Xiao. Feng Xiao was dumbfounded. Had Suebichu gone mad? But his expression was entirely serene, as if Feng Xiao had hallucinated his last words. Before Feng Xiao could respond, Suebichu grew impatient and made the first move. He mussed his clothes and loosened his hair, then sprawled on the carpeted ground. I'm so sorry. He gave his neck a couple of hard pinches for good measure. Have they turned red? He asked in a low voice. Feng Xiao had begun to grasp Suebichu's plan. This was a risky situation, fraught with danger, yet Feng Xiao wasn't nervous at all. He was greatly amused. That he was experiencing it with Suebichu only made it more entertaining. Without further ado, he climbed atop Suebichu and was immediately greeted with pained cries. No, not here. Ugh. Suebichu's voice rose and fell, twisted and turned, slightly breathless and certain to cause misunderstandings. Feng Xiao's mouth twitched as he watched Suebichu throw himself into the performance. Hearing the commotion, the man outside tossed open the door flap and rushed inside. He stared at Suebichu and Feng Xiao in shock. Faking embarrassment and anger, Suebichu shoved Feng Xiao aside with one hand, stumbling upright and pointing at the attendant with his other. You, get the hell out, he yelled in Turkic. Why? Okay, well, I suppose that's a great place to end for today. Oh my god, I am so sorry. That was not my intention to just burst into giggles for so long. All right. Let's review my notes, I suppose. So first off, I guess maybe we'll see in the next chapter, because I'm trying to figure out why Tsubichu decided they needed to have this whole charade. And maybe I'll just need to think about it longer than sharing my thoughts with you all right after finishing, but I've got no idea. You guys let me know in the comment section what you think. And if I have any brilliant ideas along the way, I'll post it in the comments, but I doubt it. So the next thing that I will say is, let's go to the top. On page 239, which is the opening, hold on, which is the opening of the chapter 65. Yes, we get to a point where basically Tsubichu is like, okay, every time you praise me, I have one thing that comes to mind. What's up? And for those of you who don't remember the praise, it was from the last chapter when basically Feng Xiao was like, a family with mediocre talent like the Cui clan of Boling could never raise a man as capable of you. So when he was like, there's one thing that comes to my mind when you praise me. And Feng Xiao was like, oh, when it comes to the great men of the world, only Liu Bei and Cao Cao qualify. So just so you know, these are, as it says in the footnote, opposing generals from Romance the Three Kingdoms, a historical war epic considered one of China's 4 great classic novels. So that gives you a little more insight to that line. And then Cui Bichu was like, nah, the weasel paying the chicken a New Year's visit. So that is an idiom that refers to someone who comes with bad or insincere intentions. Okay, so that's it on that part. Now, we have my next note. When Feng Xiao was thinking about possibly starting to mess with Qiao Xian, my only thoughts are, Feng Xiao, please leave Qiao Xian alone, because you might be stronger than her, but I feel like if you push her buttons the wrong way, she will find a way to murder you. So maybe don't mess with the woman, okay? And then I am so glad again, even if she's not playing a major role, which we don't know how much longer she'll be in the picture or anything like that. But I love to see that we yet again have another clearly brilliant woman in Meng Xi Shi's stories. And that would be the Katun Jin Lian. She seems to be a very understanding, thoughtful woman. And even Cui Bichu sees this and even was like, man, if she was the Khagan, we would be having a completely, different scenario going on right now. And so it's just, man, it's so sucky because, a lot of times we have these brilliant women who don't get to exercise their full brilliance because they're in a society that flexes on the men, and that's not even something that I could be like, oh, Meng Xi Shi, what are you doing? Give some women some shine. No, she's giving them shine in the way that fits appropriately with the society that they're in. So she's being realistic in her approach to giving them the shine that she can. Even like in Thousand Autumns, we have Bai Zhong and Yuan Xiushu, who were very powerful /are, because Bai Zhong is still alive, I'm sure, but very powerful cultivators or martial artists. And unfortunately, their reputations were besmirched because of other things. So, it's just nice to see that we have another woman who's clearly got some skills, whether it's mentally or physically, And then the other thing I wanted to say, which is really the last thing I have to say, I totally understand Apa Khagan in this situation. He had an original plan, and then someone else, Foar, shows up and is basically this big, strong man and considered, one of the finest of the Guk Turks in the martial arts world. I totally would probably switch up too, not even gonna lie. And then, just bide my time and see who exactly is the strongest. Because, you don't want to side with the wrong people. Even if it was your original intent to side with Great Sui, which I get it. If he were to turn down Cui Bichu and Feng Xiao, he's turning down more than just them, but all of Great Sui. And clearly, Great Sui has more of an upper hand right now. But still, in the moment, like, you're not thinking necessarily about all of Great Sui. He's thinking in the moment, not the big picture. But also, even if he was thinking in the big picture, I'm not really sure if it would be very helpful in his current situation. So I understand with him being stuck between a rock and a hard place, and I can't wait to see like just how all of this unravels in the next few chapters, because we know they're going to come out on top, right? But also, like, this whole thing with Feng Xiao and Fo are fighting. What is this? The third time they fought now? I need somebody to die. And by somebody, I really just mean Fo. I need Feng Xiao to actually win and then keep his promise to give Cui Buchu his head. So that was that. We reached all the way to chapter 68, and we'll be reading some more chapters. We've got about 2 videos left. Yeah, so I will see you all next time. Please leave your comments, your thoughts, and reactions in the comments, and I'll see you all next time. 我爱你们。